Today we will be discussing Shakespeare's Othello and Poetics by Aristotle. I'm Danielle Piscata.
I'm Riley Keene.
I'm Elise Lejevic.
And I'm Melissa Rodos.
So first, we chose Othello because we believe that it greatly exemplifies the points that Aristotle is making in Poetics, and it shows what a tragedy is and the importance of it. So here we have Riley, and she'll be giving us a brief background of Poetics.
So as Danielle mentioned, Poetics was written by Aristotle, and what he discusses is his approach to poetry, and he proposes that as readers we should approach poetry scientifically. He starts off by mentioning some of the different types of poetry, which include epic poetry, tragedy, comedy, dioramic poetry, flute playing, and lyre playing poetry. Aristotle also provides us with a definition of what a tragedy is, jumping right into that specific type of poetry. He says that a tragedy is often very serious, the action is complete, and ends with the magnitude of the play. Language is full of rhythm and harmony in tragedies. However, rhythm and harmony are not usually regulated throughout the play. Another important point of tragedies that Aristotle mentions is that they're performed, not narrated. Tragedies are meant to be seen as a play, and seeing the action, not listened to as you might an epic poem. And tragedies are often, the point of tragedies is often to invoke pity and fear in the audience. Another important aspect of tragedy that Aristotle brings up is the difference between simple and complex plots, and the fact that he personally prefers complex plots, and the fact that tragedies often are made of complex plots, which we will be talking about a little bit later. Some of the requirements that Aristotle mentions for a good plot, especially a good plot of a tragedy, is that the plot focuses on one main issue. The hero of the story goes from fortune to misfortune. Misfortune in tragedies often results from hamartia, which is another word for error in judgment. And the hero is typically someone who is very average, who isn't particularly good or particularly bad. The heroes usually have good qualities that are appropriate to their character, and they're realistic and they're consistent, but they're by no means particularly noble or unnoble. Poetics is a great example of Aristotle's work, where he brings up the different aspects of tragedies in many other plays. So now Elise is going to talk specifically about a tragedy written by Shakespeare.
Okay, so Othello is a tragedy written by William Shakespeare that takes place mainly on the island of Cyprus. It follows Othello, Desdemona, Cassio, and Iago, along with Rodrigo, but he's a more minor character. Othello and Iago, as well as Cassio, are all in the military, and Othello and Desdemona, before the plot really thickens, had just gotten married. They actually elope, which kind of foils Rodrigo's plan to marry Desdemona. Iago has a very sinister motive in the play, and he has decided that because Othello overlooked him for a promotion and gave the promotion to Cassio, Iago is going to destroy Othello and his life. Iago sets out about doing this by framing Desdemona and Cassio to make it seem to Othello like they have had an affair. Othello ultimately believes this ruse through many elaborate tricks, and because of this, Othello ends up killing Desdemona and then himself. Iago is tortured by some other people in the military. Cassio is kind of paralyzed from the waist down, put in a wheelchair, and Rodrigo also dies. Now to Danielle and Melissa, who will discuss how Othello exemplifies tragedy.
Okay, so first off, one of the things that was mentioned in Poetics was the use of a complex plot. And through this tragedy, we see that the story imitates real life, and that's the first most important thing. So Othello is a man, he's a soldier, and he's pretty well honored in what he does, and he has a lot of honor. And so we see that as a soldier, he finds himself not being able to tell the difference of what a soldier does and what a husband does, and that is ultimately the issue between him and Desdemona and causes their downfall. because Othello allows himself to be driven crazy by Iago's plan and does not trust Desdemona, and instead is able to be foiled by exactly what Iago wanted. So Othello goes from his fortune is reversed from good fortune to bad fortune.
Okay, and another aspect of a tragedy is that it should arouse emotions in the audience. So Othello definitely does do this with the many twists and turns in the plot. It always keeps the audience on the edge of their seat wondering what's going to happen. A plot should always have all of its questions answered towards the end of the work. So we also see that because Iago's true character is revealed and Othello is constantly learning more about Desdemona's deceit, and at the end he finally realizes that it was indeed a hoax by Iago, even though the audience knew the entire time. So because of this doubt, because of the handkerchief that was planted in Cassio's room, at the end it all becomes clear.
And another important aspect of that is that Othello is just a normal man, and we see that his biggest vice is jealousy, and that's another important part of the tragedy, because ultimately we see that no matter how heroic he was, he still allows himself to eventually have a tragic end by killing Desdemona and killing himself in a way that is not honorable.
Yes, and this is also evident in Shakespeare's other tragic works written in the same tragic period, and these are Macbeth and Hamlet. And in both of these plays, we see the title character die as a result of.
So going off of characters, in Aristotle's Poetics, he mentions what a tragic character should be like and what they should do. How do you think Othello fits that definition of what a tragic character should be doing?
I think Othello fits the tragic hero almost perfectly, because we see that while he is a man of upstanding character and while he is a benefit in the military and as a person, he is able to be consumed by jealousy just by a few different tricks that Iago plays on him. And he actually doesn't confront Desdemona until it's too late and until he's too far gone by anger. And so we see how he is able to assume things even though they may not be true, which shows his own failings as a character.
Yeah, so the fact that Othello is such a realistic character and the fact that he is relatable to the audience also makes him embody the tragic hero more fully.
And similarly, going along with that, him being the tragic hero, he obviously has faults, but we see that he does care about Desdemona, and the fact that he did kill her causes him to kill himself, which shows that he did have emotions but he let his bad vices get the most of him.
And especially because of his military background, the way that he was trained to go into action and to think about questions later and go straight into doing what he thinks is right, that leads to his hasty decision to kill Desdemona, which he ultimately regrets.
Exactly, and in that way, it's very hard, as we previously mentioned, he cannot tell the difference between what it means to be a lover or to be a warrior, and that plays into the story.
So can you talk a little bit about how Othello specifically fits what a complex plot is, especially for a tragedy?
I think that because there are so many characters and each one has their own specific agenda, this really constitutes a complex plot, because we see Iago, who has his idea, which is to destroy Othello, and Desdemona and Cassio team up to try and get Cassio reinstated after he is stripped of his rank, and Rodrigo, whose motive is to marry Desdemona, which requires Othello to be kind of eradicated in social standing or just permanently in life, and those all contribute to the plot being very complex and very intriguing for the audience.
Aristotle mentions one of the definitions too of a complex plot is ignorance to knowledge. So specifically, does that play into Othello at all, or would you argue that's for other tragedies?
I think that does play into Othello because Othello doesn't realize that he's being manipulated by Iago until it is too late. So because of his constant ignorance and his being a step behind Iago's manipulation, he doesn't really figure out what's going on until it's too late.
Exactly. Along with that, Othello, he allows himself he makes assumptions of what is going on. And Iago, since he was a man that he trusted, Othello believes him instead of trusting Desdemona or going to her himself. And especially the handkerchief, which is a key point in the plot. Finding that handkerchief in Cassio's room, it really is too much for Othello. And so his ignorance on the matter really is what causes a big problem in the play.
Yes, and I think the reason we chose Othello to do this video project on was because of how well it embodied Aristotle's Poetics.
Because we see how each character in Othello can directly be linked to exactly how Aristotle described a character in a tragedy and how they should act. It's really remarkable how well Othello's characters are able to fulfill every requirement of a tragic character.
Well, I think that answers all my questions. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed our discussion on Othello and Poetics, and we will see you next time.